Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Today I want to talk about civilization. I want to specifically talk about how civilizations succeed and fail. This is a framework. It's a framework not geared towards just understanding why they succeed and fail, but trying to explain it in a way that that actually provides a framework around which one can posit reforms. So, for example, here we have what I want to talk about is Arnold Toynbee, his specific perspective on what makes a civilization thrive, and then how it comes to collapse, right? Now, why is this important? This is important because if, for example, you come from the African continent and you're thinking about reforms, there's so much demand for institutional reform, and the evidence is just in so many different quality of life measures. You know, per capita could be it, but if we go a little further and talk about, say, premature deaths, just anything that measures the quality of life that Africans have. Because arguably, you could have a high quality of life even on a low per capita income. So specifically, we want to ask ourselves, how can we actually frame the failures in our society and chart a path towards success, or at least start having conversations, because I think that is also important. Let's get right into it. So, how does society progress according to Arnold Toynbee? Now, Arnold Toynbee was a historian, a storied British historian, and he was really fascinated by a lot of things, including the rise and fall of civilization. So, he thinks that first, what always happens is a society is challenged by entropy, right? Entropic forces. So that's a concept from, say, I think it's a concept used in physics, in systems thinking. Entropy is I think it's a thermodynamic property, something, right? It's really about how systems move towards collapse. So when they say entropy, they're trying to talk about everything that just moves a system towards collapse. So Toynbee thinks that a society is challenged by an entropic force, and then the society responds to the challenge. So what's an example of a challenge, right? Challenges can exist in all kinds of dimensions, right? Challenges could be environmental. Challenges could be climate-based challenges. A challenge could be poverty, right? Institutional failure, right? One example of a challenge is, say, the Roman Empire is just can't afford to keep to hold itself together. That's an example of a challenge. Another challenge is, some new religion called Christianity emerges in the Roman Empire. That's a challenge. It's a challenge to the order of the day. From the Roman perspective, up until at least the way that from the Roman perspective, this is a challenge to the status quo. So they sort of experiment until what they decide to do is, hey, you know what? We're going to take up this religion. It's going to become Roman now. The Roman Empire splits into East and West. Very, very grossly, gross simplification. Another one, right? World War II ends and the British crown just can't keep, the government just can't keep spending money on these colonies that are agitating for freedom, right? That's a challenge. One of their responses of imperial states was, okay, let's try and crush these rebellions. But it turned out that the autarkic economies, right? So many things, even the questions of human dignity were just too glaring to be ignored, and the transition was forced. So a society responds to the challenge. If the challenge is too difficult, there is stagnation. If the challenge is too great, the society is crushed. Sometimes a society does not respond to challenges as a whole. Now, we talked about civilizations, and here I said society. You can take any human unit. You could say a family, right? You could think about a family and say, okay, if we want to simplify what's going on with our family, well, our family is challenged by entropy, and then the family responds to that challenge. So you're thinking about a successful response also needs to be in a sweet spot, right? If it's too difficult, we're going to stagnate and probably move towards collapse. If the challenge continues to compound. Now, whichever country you're from, think about and this is, of course, is a framework can be applied globally, but specifically, the African continent is extremely poor. Okay. And not only is it poor, but it's mired by just institutional decay. Sometimes these institutions weren't even good to start with, and maybe some of them have been decaying continuously since independence. Now, how does a society respond to the challenge? Well, Toynbee posits that a creative minority finds a solution, then they inspire a majority to follow suit, and then the masses follow suit and apply the solution by imitation. Now, he thinks that the masses could not have discovered the solution on their own, and he calls this a process of mimesis. I don't know how that's pronounced, but essentially it's this. Who are this creative minority? The challenge could be cultural, right? For example, if you're in the Roman Empire, you're a woman, and divorces are just so high, it's so easy for you to be left with a child on the street. And then the Christians come along and they say, look, we think that marriage, we are offering ironclad marriage contract, right? We take care of those who can't take care of themselves. I mean, for example, the Roman soldiers practiced, they worshipped Midras? Can't remember the name of the religion, but their cult was strictly for men only, right? It was a very, very popular cult because almost every Roman soldier practiced it. And they spread it throughout the Roman Empire, right? But then here comes an one, and there were so many different challenges, but this challenger is just so attractive to the poor, the disenfranchised, including women. So this creative minority found a solution to a problem, and then so many people subscribed to their solution. What's another example? Civil rights. It took a creative minority in the United States, it's embodied by the experiences and the expressions and the actions of Martin Luther King, right? A creative minority that found a solution to the absence of civil rights. And one has to think back and ask just how creative was Martin Luther? Martin Luther, I would argue, managed to orchestrate a moral drama for the American people and for the world by advocating a certain style of protest. He really had a grasp of the myth that he was trying to, and I mean myth in the highest sense, right? The myth that he was trying to transmit to a society that he believed was going in the wrong direction, and that many believed was going in the wrong direction. Imagine what it meant for white Americans to see, to sit on their television, turn them on and see people like them and police officers and federal agents acting in their name, right? In the name of the United States of America. Pouring what is it called? Let's say people are protesting and they're sicking dogs upon them, pouring water, the water cannons, and these are peaceful protesters, and they seeing them coming out again and again and again and relentlessly, and they're asking about this thing called civil rights. I imagine that there came a point where people started to change. Like, he transmitted a myth and inserted it into the minds of the masses. And with time, reforms came. People followed suit. Let me see if I can think of another example. The European Union, right? Decades, hundreds of years of wars, culminating in the Second World War, right? Let's say the North Atlantic elite on the European side are wary of war. It's been devastating. The First and Second World War have been especially devastating, right? Now you have a people who you have a landscape that is littered with, it's been bombed out. Across the Atlantic, what the Americans decided is, look, we want a Europe that is resurgent, so we are going to do what they call the Marshall Plan, and they provide billions upon billions in credit and all kinds of sometimes debt that's forgiven, low interest debt, etc., and rebuild Europe. And the Europeans, for their part, decide, let's move towards economic and political integration. And they have the European steel and coal, this European steel and coal something market, some form of political and economic integration between France, Germany, and I can't remember the other players, but the seeds of the European Union were planted in very early in the post-war period, and you had decades upon decades of continued integration that culminated in the late 90s in the European Union. So the European Union didn't just appear. Now, elites, a creative minority, people who had policy skills, they had the experience of war, the scarring experience of the Second World War. Some of them very idealistic people who also put together the United Nations, right? You can count its wins and losses for yourself. This is the process of mimesis. Now, how will society commit suicide? This according to Toynbee. So, the synchronicity between the creative minority and the masses creates civilization. So you have a creative minority that continues to innovate solutions for their society. And a civilization it represents a human accomplishment at just a large scale, right? You could think of it as a stage of a complex society, right? You could, for example, posit the existence of a human civilization. So the human civilization also innovated the World Trade Organization and all the other active organizations and multilaterals that served to try and integrate the world. One idea was, if the world is more economically integrated, the chances for war reduce. So why don't we lower our tariffs? We thought that raising tariffs was the way to build our nations, to protect our industries. But what did we have instead? We had a tariff war that tore apart the world apart and pushed these countries into war. So let's lower tariffs. Very, very successful, because if you look at the data over time, since the Second World War, you have a human civilization that has lowered trade barriers against itself and moved towards more and more economic integration. So then you have a decline in the creative minority leading to destruction. So Toynbee thinks that as soon as the creative minority stop being creative, we move towards destruction. As soon as they're not solving the problems they have anymore, the creative minority degenerates, civilization degenerates. The creative minority in charge of, say, who have been steering the world's multilateral systems, and some of the wealthiest countries, one could ask, what did they do in the post-Cold War period? Now, let me give you an example. One idea in the post-Cold War period was that the United States could have reduced the size of its military, reduce its obligations, security obligations to Europe, in order to induce the taking up of more multilateral responsibilities by the Europeans, so that as time passes, they would build more robust state defense and actually take up leadership in the creation of global goods. Now, here I risk sounding like I want someone else to do something for me. But the point is this. The world that we are in, whatever world you're in today, you notice all these fissures, all these problems. One has to think, where did if you're thinking according to Arnold Toynbee, you're thinking, where did the creative minority fail in kind of, couldn't they have foreseen the current circumstances and stayed away from it? Right closer to home, let's say, take Kenya. Kenya's fiscal and monetary policy since, for decades, and especially between the 90s and the 2010s, can be characterized as an Olympic athlete failing to prepare until 1 month before the Olympics, whereas he could have been training steadily over, let's say, a 4-year period, right? So Kenya could have had a correctly specified fiscal and monetary policy since the 90s that would place it among its peers at the time, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia. These countries are 4 times wealthier than they were in the early 90s. Kenya, on the other hand, is only 25% wealthier. The question here, and you can see the literature suggests that the Kenya's creative minorities represented by policymakers failed. They could have at minimum left Kenya 4 times wealthier. Instead of a 3,000 per capita GDP, we could have been somewhere around 8,000, right? We could have been wealthier. The country of Kenya could have been wealthier. So when the creative minority becomes stultified and attempts to hold by force against all right and reason a position of inherited privilege which it has seized to merit. So you have an elite that just sits there. They're not being creative anymore. They're not providing solutions, but they want to claim the prestige. So they want to maintain power, right? Maybe they're rigging elections. Maybe, all those kinds of things. They don't deserve to be there, but their place in that seat is unjustified. The proletariat, the people repay injustice with resentment. Think about how common that pattern is. Now, the descent into societal suicide. So fear and hate proliferates, violence meets violence. As society degenerates, 4 sentiments exist within the proletariat. Sometimes they might, these are just 4 that Toynbee thinks exist. You have an idealization of the past. In Kenya, it might be, times were better when we had this president. Things are so bad now. Or idealization of the future. Africa rising. Yeah, where did you hear that? Has Africa risen? They've been talking about it since the late 2000s. Africa gorged itself on debt. Many countries right now are debt-ridden. And people can still keep thinking, idealizing the future, detachment, removing of oneself from a decaying world. So detachment can also be characterized by some nihilism, but basically, detachment can also manifest in you're just spending more and more just trying to keep your walls up, staying in private schools, going to private hospitals, but not caring about the state of public goods in a given country. Another one now, transcendence, meeting the challenges of the decaying world with a new worldview. Now, this is the way that Toynbee would propose that a society can kind of rejuvenate itself. So, 3 types of failing societies, civilizations. A society with a failure of creative power in the minority. An answering withdrawal of imitation on the part of the majority. Right? So, for example, policymakers no longer have any good ideas on where a country should go, or they are pussyfooting around the issue. They don't want to confront, they don't want to treat the population as adults and say, this is what we've got to do. Then this is the price we're going to pay, because this is the mistake we made. Right? It's political. Maybe it's the end of one's political career. An answering withdrawal of imitation. So maybe the majority say, you know what? The elites have nothing to offer. This creative minority has nothing to offer. We don't want to have the same religion as they do. We don't want to have the same values as they do. We don't care about maybe it's democracy or maybe it's autocracy. We don't care about that anymore. We don't care about their archaic African traditions where women are to be seen but not heard, where they should have no voice in the politics of a nation. That's an example. And the people could say, you know what? No, we don't want any part of that. Another one could be maybe the creative minority is actually destructive. Think about renditions of persons, kidnappings, and all that sort of thing. People don't want any part of that anymore. But let me see if another good example. Maybe general proliferation of debauchery, perhaps. Finally, a consequent loss of social unity in the society as a whole. Think about tribal lines. Think about the Eastern and the Western Roman Empire. Think about the end of the Egyptian civilization, right? Think about see another example of social unity. Right? Maybe Alexander, after he dies, and his generals that he left as governors start the infighting. So this is one way to start to think, to sit down in a community and think, what is going on? What takeaways do I propose from this? First, people have got to have more faith in the creativity that they have. You're a creative minority if you're specialized to a certain degree, or you have access to certain resources, or a combination of the above, right? Maybe your creativity is manifest in what you've already accomplished in the world of, say, business, maybe even in the world of politics, of statecraft. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's keep up these conversations, try to figure out, what are we going to do?